The pen was already in Carolyn Whitfield's hand. The rejection form sat flat on her desk, already filled out, already dated. All it needed was her signature, and Raymond Hollis would be escorted off the grounds of Maplecrest Senior Care Center before dinner. She had made this decision before, plenty of times. Some residents were simply too volatile, too unpredictable, too far gone for a facility like hers. That was not cruelty, that was reality. But something stopped her hand. Behind her, lay through the glass partition, she could see her intake nurse, Patricia, carefully folding a worn army jacket into a brown bag, the last of Raymond's belongings, being prepared for return. And tucked into the breast pocket of that jacket, half hidden beneath a frayed American flag patch, a small velvet box had fallen open. Inside it was a Purple Heart. Carolyn didn't move, because on the back of that medal she could already see the engraved unit designation from where she stood, 3 feet away, through glass. 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry, 1968. Her hand went cold. Her brother James had served in 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry, 1968. Her brother James, who had come home in a flag-draped box when Carolyn was 9 years old. Her brother James, whose name she had carried like a stone in her chest for 46 years. Her brother James, about whom her dying mother had whispered just once, "Somebody carried him when he couldn't carry himself." Carolyn set the pen down. She stared at the man through the window, hunched in a plastic chair, jaw set hard, eyes fixed on the floor, like a man who had spent a lifetime refusing to let anyone see him break. She did not know yet what this man had done. She did not know yet what this medal meant, but she knew she was not signing that form, not yet. To understand what was happening inside Maplecrest Senior Care Center on that cold Tuesday in November, you first have to understand who Raymond Hollis was, or rather, who his family had decided he was. Raymond was 73 years old. He stood 5'11", or he used to. Age and a fused lower spine had taken 2 inches from him. He had a full head of silver hair, deeply lined brown skin, and eyes the color of old concrete, grey and hard and giving nothing away. He had worked 31 years as a machinist in a tool and die plant in Roanoke, Virginia. But he had raised 2 children, mostly alone after his wife Eleanor died of ovarian cancer in 1997. He had never once asked anyone for help with anything. That was the Raymond Hollis who existed before the strokes. The first one hit in March of the previous year. Minor, his doctor said, manageable. A slight slurring of speech, some confusion in the mornings, a tremor in his left hand that came and went. Raymond dismissed it the way he dismissed most things. He gritted his teeth, adjusted, and told nobody. The second stroke came 7 months later. This one was not minor. This one took his ability to manage stairs, took his short-term memory in unpredictable chunks, and left him with what his neurologist called emotional dysregulation, a clinical term for what his daughter Brianna described to her husband Derek as Dad going off like a smoke alarm over nothing. He had thrown a plate. He had screamed at a home health aide and reduced her to tears, and he had locked himself in his bathroom for 9 hours and refused to come out. He had, on one occasion that nobody in the family talked about directly, gotten into his car at 3 in the morning and driven 40 miles before a police officer found him parked in front of a building that had been demolished 12 years ago, the building where his wife Eleanor had worked before she got sick. That was the Raymond Hollis who sat in the intake chair at Maplecrest. His daughter Brianna was 45. She had her father's eyes, but not his silence. She felt everything loudly, cried easily, and spent most of her adult life trying to be the person that Raymond Hollis never needed her to be. Until suddenly, he did. She had taken a leave of absence from her job as a middle school vice principal to manage his care. She had researched 14 different facilities across 3 states. She had argued with insurance companies until her voice gave out. She had driven 4 hours each way, 8 times, just to sit with her father through medical appointments he refused to speak at. She loved her father completely, and she was falling apart. Her husband, Derek Gant, was an operations manager for a logistics company, precise, efficient, and deeply uncomfortable with anything that could not be scheduled, predicted, or contained. He had supported Brianna through the first stroke. He had been patient through the second, but patience had curdled, and slowly and quietly into something harder. "We have a life, Brianna. We have a marriage. We have 2 kids who barely see their mother. And I am telling you clearly, if you don't get him placed somewhere permanent, I don't know where that leaves us." Brianna had stood very still when he said that. She had not cried. She had taken her coat off, hung it on the hook by the door, gone upstairs, and sat on the edge of her daughter's bed in the dark for a long time, listening to the child breathe. Then she had called Maplecrest the next morning. Raymond's son Calvin was a different story. Calvin was 41, lived in Phoenix, worked in commercial real estate, and had not been to Virginia in 2 years. He and his father had what Brianna politely called an unresolved history, what she privately knew to be a wound so old and infected that neither man would ever name it in front of another person. Time when Brianna called Calvin to tell him about the placement decision, he had said, "You do what you have to do," and then asked if there were any issues with the house that would affect the estate. Brianna had hung up without responding. The intake evaluation at Maplecrest had not gone well. Raymond Hollis sat through the cognitive assessment with the flat, tight-lipped endurance of a man being asked to prove himself to someone he did not respect, and he answered the nurse's questions in monosyllables. When the social worker, Marcus Trent, asked him how he felt about the transition, Raymond looked at him for a long moment and said, "How do I feel? Son, I've been shot at. This is a chair." When the dietary coordinator asked about food preferences, Raymond said, "Food is food." When the activities director described the facility's recreational programs, chair yoga, watercolor painting, afternoon movie screenings, Raymond's expression did not change, but his left hand gripped the armrest until his knuckles went pale. He was not disruptive. He was not threatening. He was simply a man who radiated a particular kind of barely contained endurance that made every soft, well-meaning person in that building feel slightly unqualified to handle him. Carolyn had approved a 2-week trial admission. She believed in giving people a chance before the paperwork caught up with them. That chance lasted 11 days. Day 1 went smoothly. Raymond Hollis moved into room 14B at Maplecrest with a single duffel bag and the brown army jacket he would not let anyone touch. He ate dinner in the main dining room without incident. He slept, according to the night shift log, without waking. He said good morning to the aide who brought his medication, and he took the pills without argument. Patricia Osei, who had been a nurse at Maplecrest for 11 years and had developed what she called her first-week radar, told her colleague at the shift change, "He's going to be fine. He's just a proud man trying to hold it together. Give him 2 weeks and he'll be playing dominoes with Mr. Ashford." Day 3 was when it started. A new resident named Gerald moved into the room directly across the hall from Raymond. Gerald was 80, cheerful, and extremely hard of hearing, which meant his television ran at a volume that Patricia once described as somewhere between a concert and a natural disaster. At 11:15, Raymond Hollis was standing in the hallway outside Gerald's room, not in pajamas, but in his full street clothes, knocking on the open doorframe. When the night aide, Troy, reached him, Raymond said very calmly, "I need that television off." Troy said he would handle it. Raymond said he had been awake since it started, and he stood in the hallway for the next 22 minutes with his arms crossed and his back against the wall and his eyes fixed on a point in the middle distance, the way, Patricia would later say, of a man standing guard. Day 5 was an incident. Dr. Sylvia Huang, Maplecrest's attending physician, came to Raymond's room to conduct a standard medical review. She asked Raymond about his pain levels, his sleep, his appetite, his mood, and then she said, and she would later tell Carolyn she had not intended anything by it, "Raymond, are you feeling confused at all? Disoriented?" Raymond looked at her. "I know exactly where I am. I know exactly what day it is. I know exactly why I'm here. What I am is tired. There's a difference." Dr. Huang nodded and wrote something down. Then she said, gently, professionally, "I understand. Sometimes after a neurological event, it can be hard to track." Raymond stood up. He was not aggressive, and he did not raise his voice, but he stood up from the chair with a speed and a physical presence that made Dr. Huang take one step back, and he said, "I was running a machine shop at 22 years old. I have been supporting myself and everyone around me since before you were born. Do not talk to me about hard to track." He walked out of his own room and did not return for 3 hours. He was found sitting on a bench in the exterior courtyard in 42-degree weather, wearing only his shirt. Days 6 through 9 were quiet. Too quiet, Patricia said, the kind of quiet that was really a man gathering himself. Day 10 was when Brianna's world fell apart. She had come for her regular afternoon visit, and she had brought Derek. This was a mistake. She knew it was a mistake the moment they walked in together, Derek's hands in his pockets, looking around the facility the way he looked at everything, calculating, appraising, already deciding whether it measured up. Raymond took one look at his son-in-law, and his face went somewhere Patricia had not seen before. Not anger, exactly, but the complete absence of whatever small warmth he had been allowing himself. The visit lasted 20 minutes. Derek had made one comment. One. He had looked at Raymond's room, at the bare walls, the duffel bag still unpacked in the corner, the army jacket hung over the chair, like Raymond was ready to leave at any moment, and said, with the particular brand of well-meaning obtuseness that made Brianna want to walk into traffic, "Dad, you know you can put some things up, make it feel more like home." Raymond turned to look at him with an expression that could have stripped paint. "It's not home." The silence that followed had weight to it. Brianna stepped between them, which she had been doing her whole marriage, and said something bright and redirecting about the common room, and Derek took out his phone, and Raymond turned and looked out the window for the rest of the visit. After they left, Raymond did not come to dinner. He did not come to breakfast the next morning either. Morning Patricia found him at 6 a.m., sitting on the floor of his closet with the army jacket folded across his knees and the velvet box open in his hand, staring at the Purple Heart inside it with an expression she would later describe to her husband as the look of a man having a conversation with someone who isn't there. She had crouched down. She had said softly, "Mr. Hollis, Raymond, do you want to come eat something?" He had looked up at her, And then she had seen something she had not expected from this man. Not confusion, not anger, but grief. Pure, old, settled grief. The kind that does not surprise you anymore because you have been carrying it so long it has become part of your posture. "I'm all right. Just give me a minute." She gave him 10. Then she helped him up. Day 11 was the incident that ended the trial. A new family was touring the facility when Raymond, sitting alone at a table near the window with a cup of coffee going cold in front of him, was approached by the visiting husband, a man who meant well, absolutely meant well, who sat down uninvited and said, "You a vet? My dad was a vet, Army, 68. What branch were you?" Raymond told him Army. The man said, "No kidding, what unit?" Raymond said, "1st to the 7th. And the man, leaning forward with genuine enthusiasm, he said, "Man, you guys were at Ia Drang, right?" That must have been something. Raymond's coffee cup hit the table. Not thrown, placed. Set down with a precision that was somehow worse than throwing it. He stood up and looked at the man with an expression the man would later describe as, like he looked right through me to something behind me. And he said, in a voice that was very quiet and very final, "You don't ask a man about that, you hear me? You don't sit down uninvited and ask a man about that." The couple left without completing the tour. The husband filed a formal concern with the front desk. That night, Marcus Trent wrote his recommendation. Resident presents ongoing safety concerns for staff and other residents. Behavioral patterns suggest significant emotional dysregulation beyond the facility's current capacity for management. Recommend formal discharge. Carolyn Whitfield was 54 years old, and she ran Maplecrest Senior Care Center with a reputation for being firm but fair, for knowing every resident's name within the first week, and for having a particular kind of stillness about her. The kind that told everyone around her that she had survived something and come out the other side with her spine intact. What most people at Maplecrest did not know was that she had grown up as the youngest of 4 children in a military family, and that her eldest brother James Whitfield had gone to Vietnam at age 19 and had not come back alive. He had been killed in action in April of 1968, and Carolyn had been 9 years old, and her mother had sat her down on the kitchen steps and said, "James is gone," and the world had rearranged itself around that sentence in ways that Carolyn was still, 46 years later, sorting through. She had kept James's photograph on her office desk for 30 years. She had his letters in a box at home. She had his dog tags, which her dying mother had pressed into her palm with the instruction to keep them safe, as though the metal itself still needed protecting. She had tried, once in her 30s, to find someone who had served with James, writing to the Veterans Administration, sending 3 letters that were never answered. The trail had gone cold the way trails from that war always went cold, and eventually she had stopped following it, or she had accepted that some things were just gone. But standing now at the glass partition, staring at the Purple Heart in Raymond Hollis's velvet box, she was doing math in her head. Fast, almost desperate math. 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry, 1968. James had been 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry, 1968. The overlap could mean nothing, but it could mean something. She walked out of her office. She reached past Patricia gently and lifted the velvet box. She turned it in her hands. On the back of the medal, in small stamped letters, Raymond E. Hollis, PFC, 1st B and 7th C, AV, Republic of Vietnam, 1968. Her heart was doing something she could not name. She looked through the glass at Raymond. He was still in the plastic chair, still staring at the floor. His jaw was still set. His hands were still folded. "Where is the family?" she said. "Daughter is in the parking lot. Patricia said quietly. She was crying when she came in.
The husband dropped her off and didn't come in. Carolyn walked to the front entrance. Brianna Hollis-Gaunt was sitting on the bench outside, with her coat pulled around her and her eyes red-rimmed, her phone face down on her knee. She was not on the phone. She was just sitting the way people sit when they have run out of what to do next. She stood when she saw Carolyn coming, already bracing for the blow. Ms. Whitfield, I know what the report says. I know you've made a decision. I just needed to tell him myself. He deserved to hear it from me. Sit down, please. Brianna sat. Carolyn sat beside her on the bench. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, tell me about your father. Not the incidents, not the medical history. Tell me about him. Something in Brianna's face broke open carefully, the way something breaks when it has been held shut, so long that the opening feels like damage. She told Carolyn about Raymond Hollis.
She told her about the man who had worked double shifts for 3 straight years after Eleanor died, so that his children could finish school without loans. About the man who had never once told either of his children that he loved them out loud, but who had shown up to every school event, every game, every performance, sitting in the back row so he wouldn't block anyone's view, as who had once driven 6 hours in a snowstorm to pick Brianna up from a college party she called him from at 2 in the morning because she did not feel safe, and had not said a single word about it on the drive home, just handed her a fast food bag at a rest stop somewhere in the dark, and let the silence be kind. She told Carolyn that Raymond had volunteered at the VA hospital for 9 years, had sat with other veterans through medical appointments without being asked, and had never once talked about his own service while doing it. She told Carolyn about the Purple Heart. He never told us why he got it. We found it in his drawer after the second stroke. He didn't put it in a shadow box, he didn't frame it. It was just in that box, in a drawer, under some envelopes. Whatever happened over there, he locked it somewhere I couldn't reach. Carolyn was quiet. Then she said, "What do you know about his unit?" "1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry," Brianna said.
"Oh, Vietnam, 68. That's all I know. Why?" Carolyn told her. The silence that followed was the kind that changes the shape of a conversation. Then Brianna's phone lit up on her knee. "Derek." She turned it over without answering. "My husband wants to know if it's done." "Is it done?" Brianna looked at her. Guilt and love and grief and anger all moving through at the same time. "My father has nowhere else to go. The next option is 3 hours away. He'd be alone. He'd be completely alone, and he'd know exactly why." Her voice cracked at the end of that sentence, and she swallowed it hard. He may have shut down, he may be impossible, but he drove 40 miles in the middle of the night to park in front of a building where my mother used to work. That's not a symptom. That's a man who loves someone so hard he can't let them go. The phone buzzed again. Derek again.
"Wait, does your husband understand what your father is actually afraid of?" Brianna's jaw was tight. "Derek understands efficiency," she said, and then she looked like she'd surprised herself with how true that sounded. "I need to make a phone call," Carolyn said. "Don't go anywhere." That phone call, made standing alone in her office with the Purple Heart in her hand and James's photograph on her desk, was to the National Archives Veterans Record Center. She did not want files. She wanted one specific thing. She wanted to know whether a PFC Raymond E. Hollis and a Corporal James T. Whitfield had ever been in the same place at the same time. The archivist told her it would take weeks. Carolyn thanked her and hung up. Then she went to go talk to Raymond Hollis. She was halfway down the hall when the front entrance opened behind her. She turned. A Calvin Hollis was standing in the entrance of Maplecrest Senior Care Center with a carry-on bag over his shoulder and the particular look of a man who has flown across the country and is not entirely sure why, because the reason he told himself on the plane is already starting to feel insufficient now that he is standing in the actual place. He was taller than Raymond, lighter-skinned, like Eleanor. He had Eleanor's jaw and Raymond's eyes, and he was standing very still, and looking at his father in the plastic chair with an expression Carolyn recognized from 20 years of working with families, the expression of someone who came prepared to be angry and arrived to find something much more complicated. Raymond looked at his son. Calvin looked at his father. The distance between them, 12 feet of institutional carpeting, was somehow the longest Carolyn had ever seen. "Brianna called me." "I know she did." "I'm here." 3 words, but like the sentence had cost something. "Sit down, Calvin." Calvin sat. She did not approach him the way the social worker had. She did not sit across from him with a clipboard or a carefully composed expression of professional empathy. She pulled a chair up beside him and sat down, and she set the velvet box on the small table between them. Raymond looked at it. He did not look up. "That's mine." "I know, I'm not keeping it."
Yeah, I just want to ask you something. You've already made your decision. I'm reconsidering. That got him. He turned his head slowly, the way men who have learned to trust nothing move when something unexpected happens, and looked at her. Really looked at her. The kind of look that takes inventory. Why? Not a question, a challenge. Carolyn pointed to the medal. The unit designation on the back, 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry, 1968. My brother served with that unit, James Whitfield.
"Oh, Corporal. He was killed in April of that year." The silence that came then was different from the other silences Raymond Hollis produced. The other ones were walls, deliberate, maintained, chosen. This one was something that moved in his face before he could stop it. "Whitfield," said, very quietly. "James Thomas Whitfield." Raymond Hollis looked down at his hands for almost 2 full minutes, which is a very long time to sit in silence with a stranger. He said nothing. His jaw worked, and his left hand pressed flat against his knee as if trying to hold something down. Then he said, "I knew a Whitfield." "He was 20, Raymond said. "I was 22. He called me old man, even though there were 2 years between us." Something that might have been the ghost of a smile. He was from somewhere in Virginia. He had a gap between his front teeth. He laughed loud, and he laughed easy, and every single one of us told him to be quieter because the enemy could hear you thinking out there, let alone laughing. His voice, which had been low and even, roughened. He was the only man in our unit who would write letters for other men. The guys who couldn't write so good, he'd write their letters home for them, wouldn't tell anybody what was in them, just wrote what they asked him to. Carolyn's throat had closed entirely. "He carried a photograph," Raymond said. "Little girl, somebody's little sister. He showed it to me once. Said, 'This one's going to run the world someday. You watch.'" "That was you," Raymond said. "It was not a question." She nodded. She could not trust her voice. Raymond turned back to his hands. He closed them. He opened them. He said very quietly, "He was a good man." "I know. Can you tell me what happened to him? My family was never told the details."
Just that he was killed in action. I don't know if I can do that. I'm not asking you to do it right now. I'm asking you to consider it. He looked at her again. Something shifted in his face. Not opening exactly, but the decision not to close. Why are you reconsidering? Same flat tone, but the challenge was gone from it. Because my nurse saw you sitting on the floor of your closet with that medal, and she told me what your face looked like, Carolyn said.
Because your daughter just told me a story about a man who drove 6 hours in a snowstorm to pick her up because she needed him. And because in 30 years of this work, I have learned the difference between a man who is dangerous and a man who is devastated. Raymond's jaw worked. I don't want your charity. I know you don't, and I'm not offering it. I'm offering you a room and 3 meals a day and a nurse who already has your trust, whether you've admitted it or not.
Yeah, the rest is up to you. His left hand pressed flat against his knee again. The tremor was visible now, small and persistent. My son thinks I should be somewhere quieter. The word quieter had a weight to it that told Carolyn exactly how that conversation with Calvin had gone. What do you think? He looked at the velvet box. I think I've been trying to be quieter for 50 years and it hasn't worked out for anyone. Carolyn slipped away. She went back to her office. She sat down.
She looked at her brother's photograph, and she did something she had not done in a very long time. She cried. Just for a moment. Quietly, privately, the way you learn to when you have been holding something alone for decades, and you finally understand that holding it alone was never actually required. 3 days later, Raymond Hollis knocked on the open door of Carolyn Whitfield's office. He was standing in the doorway in his army jacket. Not because he was leaving, as Patricia had told her that morning with barely concealed relief, but because he had apparently decided the jacket was just what he wore now. He had a paper cup of coffee from the dining room. He had combed his hair. You have a minute? Yes. He came in. He looked at James's photograph on the desk. He looked at it for a long time without saying anything, and Carolyn let him look. Then he sat down. He put his coffee on the edge of her desk. He folded his hands. I'm going to tell you what happened. You should know what you're carrying, he told her. It was April 12th, 1968. His unit had been moving through triple canopy jungle on a search and clear operation. They had been in the field for 9 days. They were tired. They were low on water. The ambush came from the left flank. Out of a tree line they had already cleared according to the map. The kind of map inaccuracy that got men killed so often in that war that it had stopped being a surprise and just became one more weight to carry. The first burst of fire took down 3 men in 12 seconds. Raymond hit the ground, found cover, returned fire. Through the noise and the smoke and the chaos that is actual combat, which bears no relationship to any recreation of it that has ever been filmed, he heard a voice, James Whitfield, calling his name. Raymond looked left and saw James Whitfield flat in the open, 30 feet from cover, with a wound in his side that was bad. The kind of bad that 19 months of combat experience told him could go either way in the next 30 seconds. The fire was sustained. Moving toward James across that 30 feet of open ground was, by any calculation, a decision that would result in 2 dead men instead of 1. Raymond moved anyway. He could not tell Carolyn, but even now, 56 years later, what the decision felt like from inside. He said it was not brave. He said brave implied a choice was made consciously. He said it was more like the way your hand pulls back from a hot surface before your brain registers the burn, by the body going ahead of the thinking, going where it had to go, because to not go was something his body did not know how to do. He reached James. He pulled him, got them both behind a fallen tree, and he pressed his hands against James's side, and he talked to him. He talked to him the way you talk to someone when talking is the only thing you have left to offer. And James looked at him with those gap-toothed, loud-laughing eyes and said, "Old man, I told you I was going to be trouble. You're fine. You're going to be fine. Write a letter for me?"
Say you know I'm no good at it. You're going to write your own letter? Tell that little girl her brother's coming home. He did not come home. The medic reached them 4 minutes later. 4 minutes was too long. Raymond knew it before the medic confirmed it. He knew it the moment James's grip on his arm loosened, because it had been tight, so tight it had left a bruise that Raymond had looked at every morning for 3 weeks afterward.
Orson then felt guilty for being relieved when it finally faded. He held the wound closed until the medic arrived anyway. That was where the injury that earned the Purple Heart occurred, a fragment round that took a piece out of his left shoulder while he was crouched over James Whitfield. He had not noticed it until someone pointed it out. He had not thought about it since, except in the context of what it meant, that he had been close enough to do the math. And the math was that James died and Raymond did not, and the reasons for that were random and had nothing to do with merit. I should have moved faster. I have thought about that every day for 56 years. Carolyn was very still. You moved at all? It wasn't enough. Raymond. She waited until he looked at her. My brother died with someone beside him who loved him, who talked to him, who held on to him. Do you understand how much that matters to someone like me? Or do you understand that I have spent 46 years hoping that was true and not knowing? Raymond's jaw was working. The tremor in his left hand was going. He wasn't alone. Because of you, he was not alone. Raymond Hollis pressed both hands flat against his knees and bowed his head and took several careful, controlled breaths. The kind of breaths a man takes when he is allowing himself something he has been refusing for a very long time. Carolyn did not say anything else, or she let the silence hold him the way a good silence can. Not empty, not awkward, but full of what it needed to be full of. After a long time, Raymond straightened. He picked up his coffee. He looked at James's photograph one more time. He would have liked you running a place like this. He would have been loud about it. Raymond made a sound, low, rough, something that in another context would have been a laugh. He stood up. He tucked the chair back in. At the door, he paused.
That social worker, Marcus. Yes? Tell him I'm sorry about the chair. I'll tell him, Carolyn said. Raymond walked out. She listened to his footsteps down the hall, measured, unhurried, slightly irregular from the spinal fusion. And then she turned to her brother's photograph and said something she had not said out loud in 46 years. I found him, James. Raymond Hollis did not become a different man. He was still quieter than most.
While he still sat in the courtyard alone on Tuesday mornings, he still had nights when the sound from other rooms sent him into a silence so complete and armored that the night staff learned to leave a glass of water by the door and give him space. He still looked at people like he was deciding, like trust was something earned one small increment at a time, and that was never going to change. But things shifted. Slowly. But the way things shift when the reason for a particular kind of tension has been addressed rather than managed. He started going to breakfast. Not every morning, but most. He started sitting near Mr. Ashford, a Korean War veteran and a ferocious domino player, and the two of them developed a wordless morning ritual that Patricia watched with the private satisfaction of someone whose first-week radar had been proven right. He let Dr. Huang examine him without standing up, and he put one thing on his wall, a photograph. Not of Eleanor, not of Brianna or Calvin. He put up a photograph of James Whitfield that Carolyn had found in a box of her mother's things and brought to him one afternoon, without ceremony, just handed it to him in the hallway and walked away before he could make it into anything. He looked at it for a long time before he put it up. Brianna came every Thursday, or without Derek, which was a choice she had made after a conversation with her husband that she described to Patricia as long overdue and not finished. She and her father still did not talk the way she had always wanted them to. He was still more comfortable showing love than saying it, and she had decided finally to receive the showing as enough. They played cards. She read to him sometimes, which he pretended to find unnecessary, and clearly did not. She brought his grandchildren on alternate Sundays, and Raymond watched them with an expression that Carolyn, passing by the common room, once described to herself as a man discovering that something he had believed was permanently out of reach was actually still present. Calvin came twice more in that first year. The second visit lasted 4 days. He slept at a local hotel and came each morning and spent the day, which was more than Brianna had expected, and more, she suspected, than Calvin had planned. She did not know what Raymond and Calvin said to each other, because whatever they said it in room 14B with the door mostly closed. She did not ask. Some things were not hers to know. She was just glad the door was mostly closed instead of locked. The archivist at the National Archives, 6 weeks after Carolyn's call, sent a document confirming that PFC Raymond Eugene Hollis and Corporal James Thomas Whitfield had been assigned to Charlie Company, at 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry, from February through April 1968, and had been present at the same operational engagement on April 12th of that year. Carolyn filed it in the box with James's letters. She never framed it. She never made a display of it. But on the hardest days, the days when the paperwork was relentless and the decisions were heavy and the gap between what the work required and what she had to give felt impossible, she opened that box. Just for a minute. And just to remember that the reason she did this work was not abstract, that it had names, that it had a gap-toothed young man who had written other men's letters home and who had not been alone when he ran out of time. Raymond found her in the courtyard one evening in late spring, sitting on the bench where she had sat with Brianna on the day she put the rejection form down. He sat beside her without being invited, which was new for him. The light was going gold. The courtyard was quiet.
Are you ever going to tell me what you said to him? No. She nodded. Fair enough. They sat there as the light changed. Two people who had been carrying the same weight from opposite sides of the same loss, sitting in a facility that was not romantic and not cinematic and not what either of them would have chosen. And finding that the place had become, without announcement, without ceremony, without anyone signing a form that said so, home. Not because of the walls.
Not because of the room or the meals, but because of what happens when you stop asking a person to be something manageable and start letting them be something true. Because of what happens when grief finally finds the one person in the room who has been carrying the same story. Because of a purple heart in a velvet box in a brown army jacket, folded into a bag that never got sealed. Some things are lost. Some things wait 56 years to be found,
A Raymond Hollis had served his country before anyone in that building was born. He had carried a wound he never named and a grief he never filed. He had held someone's brother in a jungle in 1968 and refused to let go. The least the world could do, at the very least, was let someone hold him back. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button. There are hundreds of stories like Raymond's, men and women who carried everything and asked for nothing. My job is to make sure those stories don't go quiet. Like, subscribe, share with someone who needed this today. Silent Oath Stories. We don't forget.